The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
There's a viral image on Twitter that was shared by Brian Taché, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And it's of an elderly woman who every day this summer has stood out in on the streets of Minneapolis, in her neighborhood, on her corner, and she has protested every single day children being put in cages and separated from their parents. I want to read the tweet. It says, "I need to tell you this. The other day I drove by this woman holding a sign protesting children in cages. Just her. She's been out there every day, all summer. She's been flipped off. She's had drinks thrown at her, cursed at her, and she's still out there. I don't know her name, but she's my hero." And if you look at the picture, she looks like she has to be in her 60s. And she has a sign saying, "Oops, 468 parents deported. Call Congress." One person, one individual out there making a change on her own. I want to juxtapose that to what happened in D.C. this weekend at the Unite the Rally 2, as compared to what happened a year ago in Charlottesville. And I have to wrap this. You please indulge me and forgive me, but I have to wrap this in. There's a scripture that says 1 will put 1,000 to flight, and then 2 can put 10,000 to flight. Meaning 1 can chase 1,000 away, 2 can chase 10,000 away. Talking about the exponential power of the people. The people, we, you, me. We have the ability as individuals to do like that woman has done every day this summer, to stand on the corner and protest in our own way and make change by ourselves. But when we come together, we're able to destroy Nazis. It's a beautiful thing. In Charlottesville, hundreds of Nazis showed up, and they were riding a wave of enthusiasm. They were riding a wave of being mobilized and energized by the election of Donald Trump. They all dressed. I mean, they were so organized. They dressed alike. They all came out there in their Donald Trump attire. They all came out with tiki torches. They believed that this was a revolution, a renaissance of racism, if you would. And they were so emboldened to march through the streets with no masks on, showing the world who they were, that they felt like this was the time for white men who had been oppressed in history to stand up for their rights. They were growing, and the momentum was momentarily on their side. And then they ran up against the counter protesters. Then they ran up against public shaming. Then they ran up against all of the commentary, all of the backlash that they received, people losing their jobs, because you identified publicly as a Nazi and you showed who you really were. You thought that this was a new day and time when you could proudly boast that you were a white nationalist or a white supremacist or a Nazi. All of you are the same to me. But you felt as though this was the new era, a new paradigm shift had taken place, and you could promote white civil rights in the name of helping the oppressed white people in this country. And you found out through force, Antifa. You found out through public shaming. You found out because a lot of you lost your jobs. You found out because you became the scourge of society. You found out by the sheer magnitude of our crowds and our relentlessness in every shape and every form. People who actually put their physical bodies on the line. People who showed up. Maybe they didn't get physical, but they showed up and they made their presence known. People who wrote articles about this, people who posted commentary about this, people who found out your identities and made sure that the entire world knew who you were. You realized that there's no place for you in the public square. And so those hundreds of protesters of Klansmen and Nazis and white nationalists and white supremacists, who are all to me the same. Hundreds of them who showed up last year dwindled down to nothing more than a few tens of Nazis showed up. What was it, about 12 to 24 Nazis under the leadership of Jason-Kessler, who saw his, last year, he didn't get the idea. He didn't get the picture. He thought that there was something left that he could squeeze out of this moment that Donald Trump gave them. But he didn't realize last year when that elderly man, he was relatively elderly, I guess he was in his 50s, this 50-year-old man who looks like somebody's music teacher from middle school, body slammed Jason-Kessler in front of the entire world. Jason-Kessler didn't get the picture then that, yes, you can come, you can organize, you can get a permit, but you won't be there comfortably. You won't be there without pushback. You won't be there without the full ramifications of what you stand for and what you did last year. And sure, the government is going to be there to make sure that you have an opportunity to say what you want to say. But the people will also be there to ensure that you are excoriated for what you are and what you've done. One other thing before I move on to the second part of this conversation. So much has been said about Antifa and trying to draw an equivalence between who Antifa and what Antifa is and what these fascists are. And it is a very elementary, a very beginner, a juvenile way of thinking that there has to be an equivalence on the other side. This is a very elementary style of journalism that many quote unquote journalists engage in. They seek so desperately to make and give the appearance as though there is an equal evil on the opposite side. And in this case, they try to make that equal evil be Antifa. But we have seen clearly over the last year the good that Antifa has done. Because a part of the equation has not only been the public shaming, but it's been the fact that there are people who don't care. They simply do not care about putting their bodies on the line. They don't care about being attacked by police. They don't care about having to get into hand-to-hand combat with Nazis. They simply do not care. They are going to show up everywhere Nazis show up and make sure that those Nazis never forget that there is a group of people who will not sit by and play this game of free speech absolutism as Nazis gain power and subsequently take away our free speech. They're not going to do that. And that is a part of this calculus, the calculus of pushing Nazis back into the dregs of society. We're not going to be able to get rid of the ideology. There's always going to be someone who's willing to reorganize and to try to revitalize fascism, Nazism, white supremacy as it intersects with Nazism. There's always going to, we're never going to get rid of it, nor should it be our goal to get rid of it. But our goal should always be to make sure that there is hell to pay for people who will organize around destroying people simply based on who they are. So, while people like Jake Tapper of CNN is tweeting out about someone's camera cable being cut, and he's saying, yeah, this is indicative of Antifa. This is par for the course for Antifa. A guy who probably has never covered Antifa a day in his life outside of the green room, who's never actually been out there with them to see who they are actually fighting for and who they are actually fighting against. While you have people like that who are so desperate in order to give the appearance of their own civility, to give the appearance of their own unbiasedness, they're so desperate that they literally try to equate people who fight Nazis with Nazis. And if that's the case, then there's a whole, so-called greatest generation that wants to have a few words with you, Jake Tapper. one last thing before I kick it over to patrons only. The right wing in this country has perfectly insulated itself from being responsible for and accountable for their extremists. Now, most would not even admit that there is such a thing as right-wing extremism. Part of that is being intellectually dishonest. And the other part of it is a very juvenile understanding of politics. When you first get into politics, you honestly don't know better. You think everything that's wrong is wrong with the other side. That if there's a dictator in history, then that dictator must have obviously been on the other side and not hold similar beliefs that you held similar beliefs that you hold is actually the way I should say it. Right. It's a very elementary way of thinking that has infiltrated our politics in 2018. And I pause and say it so slowly because it's amazing that in a sea of information, people are still as stupid as ever. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. I mean, they can clearly look back and see the ultra conservative right wing, not only tendencies and leanings of Hitler, but extreme far right fascism of Hitler. And yet they would believe in their heart that he was not conservative. Part of it, again, is intellectual dishonesty. The other part of it is elementary style thinking, elementary level thinking. But regardless, the point is that there is right wing extremism on display every single day in this country. And it's not the fringe. What Jason-Kessler and his people marched for yesterday is literally word for word the same thing that people like Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham just got through saying on Fox News last week. So what is conservative extremism is actually the norm in this country. Donald Trump represents what average conservatives actually are. He's just a buffoon and doesn't know how to keep it wrapped up nicely and neatly in a suit and tie like Mitt Romney or like a Jeb Bush. But at the core of it is the pandering and the pandering of dog whistle politics in order to continue to hold power. That's been at the core of conservatism for at least the last 40 years. Probably more, back to Nixon. And so what we see now in Charlottesville last year and in Washington, D.C. this weekend, these are just your young people who aren't smart enough to realize that they can't keep a job if they go out there and say what's actually on their mind. And the point is that the right is not held accountable for their extremism because all of the right has become extreme. They become extreme in what they believe, but they also have become extreme in how they're willing to demonstrate it. And a lot of people are like, oh, there was only 25 Nazis out there this week. Yes, but literally, word for word, what they believe about being anti-diversity, what they believe about the changing culture, what they believe about Western culture being under attack, what they believe about the browning of America, you can find every afternoon on Fox News. Conservatism in this country is by definition an extremist ideology, and yet we can't even hold them accountable for their extremism. I mean, I guess... Honestly, I guess maybe that's like, holding them accountable for who you are. Sir, do you repudiate yourself? But even going through the machinations, going through the motions of journalism, you don't have journalists who are even willing to ask these I'm going to correct myself on the fly. You have Steve King from Iowa who is in Congress right now. He is an avowed white nationalist and white supremacist. And so look at this. I mean, look at the balance. Look at how out of balance it is. This is the asymmetrical fight. We have actual white supremacists Not just people who benefit from white supremacy, not people who ascended to power through white supremacy, but people who declare 14 words on a regular basis, who are concerned about the browning of America, who literally feel as though it is their duty to preserve a future for their white children, serving in Congress right now, and no one is even batting an eye. No one. And yet you have journalists who, like I said in the previous segment, desperately seek a false equivalence with Antifa. The only people who are actually out there fighting to protect us from these white nationalists and white supremacists. I mean, and when I say fighting, I mean actually physically fighting. I'm not talking about rhetorically. I'm not talking about public shaming. I'm not talking about policies. I'm talking about the people who actually get out there and throw some blows with these people. I want to be sure I clarify that. There are a lot of people who are fighting it, but there's only a handful of people who get out there and fight them. But I digress. The point is this. Do you see the asymmetrical fight that we are in? Where we have elected white nationalists, white supremacists. We have a media empire that's built on white supremacy, literally. I want to distinguish between ye old regular white supremacy that most white people benefit from this country, the white privilege. I want to distinguish between that and people who literally peddle white supremacist talking points as a means of getting and maintaining their political power, as their ideology, their core driving force, their inner force, their North Star is white supremacy. And they preach that dogma every single day on Fox News. And so I guess maybe it's me that should not be surprised about this. Maybe I should not be surprised that the right wing is not being held accountable for the handful of people who don't have enough sense to keep their Nazism dressed up in a suit and tie and sitting on Fox News. But that's the asymmetrical fight that we are in. And because of the fecklessness, the uselessness, and the idiocy of our mainstream media, they will always seek to draw an equivalence between whatever has enough attention on the left. This year it's Antifa. And the right-wing extremists that occupy our White House, our Congress, our Senate, our judicial system, every aspect of our government, our media, our local television stations. The right controls not just the right, but extremist. Right-wing extremism is the norm. The Republican Party is an extremist party. And what we saw on display this weekend in Washington, D.C. is just a collection of idiots, morons who don't understand that they can get away with the same exact thing if they just put it on Fox News. They could get away with the same exact thing if they just say it as a politician. So no, I started this segment talking about how the right is not held accountable for their extremists. But in actuality, the right in this country, conservatism in the United States of America, is itself an ideology of extremism. Joining me over on patreon.com/the BPD show as I cover this Atlantic article by David Frum. Yes, that David Frum. On the intellectual dishonesty of conservatives in the era of Trump. And I'm going to include the intellectual dishonesty of conservatives during the era of George W. Bush, which includes David Frum. See you on patreon.com/the BPD show.